Con questo o con questo? Ah, ok. Acceso. Mi sentite? Sì. Bene, allora buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for coming. I am Annalisa Rabiti, the chairperson of the Reggio Emilia Pharmacies, and I'm in charge of the Reggio Emilia Without Barriers project. So I welcome you here on behalf of our municipality. We are very happy that you're here today. And as Città Senza Barriere is a project that aims at getting rid of physical and mental barriers, and considering that communication is one of the most difficult barriers when it comes to disability, as a city we're very happy to host today's conference. So that said, we can start. Because I'm here also as a mother. I am Annalisa, the mother of Martino. Martino is my son, and so I'm a civil servant. I deal with politics, but politics to me means people, because in 2003 I had my son, and my son is disabled. He has a rather sort of severe physical disability, but specifically he also has several communication problems. After years of fight, and my story is not the only one, there are many stories like that here today. After having been rejected so many times because he didn't want to work with me for affection relations, finally I was able to work with Bruna, and so I was able to make my son start the facilitated communication pathway and journey, and he did not communicate at all, but now he has made progress, and I was born a second time as a mother because my son has started to be a person, and in spite of the difficulties, in spite of the hard work, he started to write thanks to facilitated communication, and the first words he wrote was "Hello, mommy," and I almost fainted because after so many years of sort of pain and suffering, I was so happy. So I'm finally very happy to be here today, not only as an institutional representative, but also as an endorser of facilitated communication, because I think that it needs to be disseminated. To me, today is a very important day to mark such a watershed day in promoting facilitated communication. So the silent words of my son are very important to me, and those for so long unexpressed words made me change, and I'm changed, and I decided to change also in other terms and to commit myself for those silent people that now can be heard, thanks to my son also. So I was so deeply hurt, and I'm a fragile woman that was, very much sort of somehow hit by life, but I'm ready today to cope with all that, and I can say that I'm able to hear silent people. So I really want to thank my son Martino, because my son every day reminds me where I come from, and so probably thanks to him I developed such a good skill to listen to silent people, and so I'm proud of my being so fragile and vulnerable. Thank you for being here, and I wish you a fruitful day. Hello, good morning. I welcome you here on behalf of the Giardino del Baobab, the Baobab Garden, that is deeply and profoundly honored to host in our city such an important conference, because our guests are high-flying speakers. We have the top world experts in the world of FC, and I want to thank all the people that joined the research work that we carried out, and say I really want to thank also our guests. I want to thank the families, and not just the members of the Giardino del Baobab, but also Vi Comunico che penso, because they committed so much in carrying out this research work. Research work that is still going on. It is going to continue. I don't know for how long, but we had a first national conference, so in Reggio Emilia, we were very proud of that. And so the Giardino del Baobab, the Baobab Garden, is a voluntary association aiming at promoting the dissemination of FC, and in particular, it tries to promote a very special concept, the uniqueness of every individual. It was established in 2001 as counter association. Then afterwards, it was turned into a voluntary association because its members, I mean the boys and girls, wanted to give their contribution to an important mindset change, because people go beyond their sort of physical appearance, go beyond their communication skills, their speaking skills. So if a person cannot speak, that doesn't necessarily mean that this person does not feel emotions, that there's no feelings, that is not able to communicate in other ways. So we have been dealing with FC for such a long time, from 1996 on, and there's an association from 2001. Then in 2013, we have started working also in other provinces, because we work in the provinces of Parma, Reggio Emilia, Modena, and a little bit in Bologna. And so we established our headquarters here because, Reggio Emilia is our hometown somehow, and also Reggio Emilia proved to be more sort of open in terms of collaborators and facilities. So we worked on training a lot, and we carried out first level training initiatives, and also we trained teachers and educators in schools, and we still deal with training and collaborate with schools. In 2013, we also created a project that is called Indomiti and Untamed, and that is a specific editorial and cultural project supported and promoted by our association. And the main goal of this cultural project is to disseminate a different vision of disability, so having to do with a different way of looking at life, of looking at the world, of looking at daily things. And the name is Indomiti, so untamed, because these boys and girls are untamed, and one of their sort of best skills is that of being resilient. So they are so strong when it comes to resiliency. And so again, well, they can feel sad from time to time or feel tired, but they are indomitable. So they are always open to comprehension and understanding through a hug, a metaphoric hug that is always based on solidarity. It's a very empathic and sympathetic hug. So allow me, please, to thank not only our speakers and guests, but also Julia, our sort of preferred scientist and researcher, and she's really dear to us. But also I would like to thank all the voluntary workers that let us carry out our activities, but also that have been working so much over the last few days to make this conference possible. They really worked very hard to sort of let this conference be possible. So I thank them very much. I thank you very much, and I wish you all the best for these 2 days. Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I am Fabio Sesti, and I'm here as representative of the Vi Comunico che penso association, and The name of this association was created by one of the members of our association, and then you will find a lot of further information on a USB key. You're going to be handed out during the break, so you will find plenty of information about the associations joining this conference, but also you will find plenty of information about other entities that are working with us. And well, our main goal is to be a national entity endorsing FC. Well, very briefly, what stage are we at? Well, some years ago, we have been talking about doing something more practical and about facilitated communication, and say we decided to act and to share experiences and information, and to say we realized that on the one hand we had a lot of experience, but on the other hand we needed to do something in order to make this technique more sort of common and more easily practiced also by public entities and institutions. And also we wanted to favor information about it in order to somehow also attract more attention also by the scientific community, because we discovered that the scientific community was not that interested in this technique. So that's why we decided to establish a national association, getting together, scientists and researchers as well. So not only, the major stakeholders. So my wish here today, also with respect to the expected results from this conference, is that we should have overcome that starting phase, and we do hope that this conference marks a first important step towards a dialogue and an acknowledgement by the scientific community, because, well, beyond the very important value of such technique that was mentioned by the previous speakers, and because again the uniqueness of an individual that is at the heart of our approaches is absolutely crucial principle. But beyond that, we really need to consider the research-related aspect, and research needs to be carried out in a rigorous way, paying the utmost attention to controls and checks that needs to sort of somehow prove the good grounds of such a technique. And in particular, criticism about this technique so far has had to do with the transmission of the message. In other words, when a person communicates through a facilitator, there are things that are communicated and that are not sort of somehow known by the assisted person. So in the experimental settings that have been tested all over the world so far, this has been, the main criticism. So we said to ourselves, we need to tackle this issue and we need to provide solid evidence, hard to debunk, to show that this is not the case, and that we will be able to gain the attention of the scientific community. Because, we do hope that, even this conference will give a contribution in this sense. We want to prove the good grounds of these message passing technique. So this is important for us to show that this technique is valid, it works, and this technique relies on complex mechanisms, but we really want to shed light on this. We're not against it, not at all. So our goal is to talk about these aspects during this conference, and we have invited to this conference also speakers that we know have doubts about the good grounds of such a technique. So we did it on purpose because we really want to stimulate a dialogue, and we have nothing to hide. We really want to talk about FC at all levels. And I mean, unfortunately, we had some miscommunication problems when it comes to mail exchanging, and sometimes technical aspects are not always easy. And unfortunately, we wanted to invite a person who has strong doubts about this technique, but unfortunately this person could not join us, because we would have really liked to talk with this person. But still, we have tried to consider the arguments and somehow expressed by this person, so that we will also try to delve into these topics during our today conference. So I do hope that, beyond the investments that so many people in this room make into this technique, also in relational terms, well, we really want to prove that what we're doing is based on solid evidence, and so it has the right to be heard, to be discussed, of course, but to be acknowledged, because this technique in many cases really stands for a liberation process from fences, from isolation, because unfortunately many people with serious communication problems are isolated and left behind. So we do hope that this conference will mark a watershed. And so that's my most important wish. So I thank you very much for your attention.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, I am Giulia. I'm very moved and I'm a very emotional person, and especially after Annalisa's words, I feel even more moved and touched. Well, a part of my brain is somehow making tricks to me, because, okay, we have come here, this is somehow a great achievement. Not at all, this is just a starting point, but I want to be short. But before leaving the floor to the other speakers, I want to say that all the research work that has been done by the Vi Comunico che Penso Association stems from the remarks of the users of this technique. And I go back to 2012, when I started reading the literature and drafting a project. One of the first things I did was going to Gorizia and ask the users of the technique, how does it work? How does facilitation works? What happens when a facilitator just puts their hands on you? And so from Gorizia then down to Reggio, we started thinking about also the proprioceptive features of this technique, and the touch, the value of touch. And it's not about ethical issues, not at all. I want to be very pragmatic. In order to be a good researcher in this field, it is absolutely essential to start from the experience of the users. First-hand experience is key. Well, I really want to close, but I really wanted to express this. And all through the conference, there are going to be users of the technique that are going to join us here on stage and will join us in explaining what we have been doing so far. I thank you very much, and I give the floor to Christy, and we're already a bit late. Thank you.
Domanda veloce, la traduzione sta funzionando.
So is everything okay with the translation? Yes? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thanks. By the interpreters.
No, 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 funziona, funziona.
Oops, hold on. Buongiorno. Good morning. Yes, I am American, so you'll want your headsets. As I looked around during the last talk, I was one of only a handful of people with the headsets on, but I will try to be mindful of that in respect to the translator who's going to do her best job to keep up with me. My name's Christy Ashby. I am here from Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York.
Non funziona?
See?
Non sta funzionando la traduzione.
Let's do this. Why don't you give me a thumbs up if you can understand?
A posto? Sì? A posto, andiamo.
Grazie mille. Julie and I are going to be both sharing sort of a joint presentation about the idea of message passing. I see my part in this in introducing the landscape of this work, putting it in a historical context, but more importantly, putting it in the context of what is it we already know about message passing that has informed the current research that's happening in Italy and also at Nottingham Trent. There's a lot of text on this screen, but I think it's really important to share this whole quote. I was really glad to hear Julia say that this work is driven by the voices and words of folks who use facilitated communication. I always start every talk I give from that perspective. So this actually comes from, I'm dating myself, 1997. The history of research on message passing, this isn't new. We've been doing this work for a couple of decades. This is actually a quote from the book, from an article that's focused on sorting it out under fire was what it was called. And it was Eugene Marcus and Mayer Shevin. And they wanted to reconstruct one of the original message passing studies to show that a person could learn how to pass messages. That while it might have been difficult for them initially, and given the constraints of the way research projects were often conducted in the early 90s, but if you learned how to do it, if you practiced, you could make sense of how to pass a message passing test. So this comes from a book written by Doug Bicklin and Don Cardinal called Contested Words, Contested Science. According to Eugene, research is really useless as its own reward. The only good purpose for research is liberation from our limitations. Research designed to make those limitations more real and more legitimate must be stopped. Great discoveries may be found in what others have overlooked. They will sometimes not recognize what they have been looking at all along. Real science takes time and experience and the ability to look critically at your own actions. That kind of science I am good at. The kind I will never be good at is the kind where one person studies another like a kind of grape or fruit fly or shell. We need allies, not people to sacrifice us on the altars of their careers. We are not something to be squeezed or swatted or listened to and dropped back on the beach. We are to be rejoiced with. We are like rare red forest demons, and so dance with us, really dance with us, or rest assured, we will dance without you. He's a true poet. As I get started, I want to recognize that this work that I'm presenting here builds on the efforts of many, many people, and I won't name all of them. But in particular, I want to thank my colleagues from Syracuse, Marilyn Chadwick, who has pioneered a lot of the original work on message passing. The former director of the Institute and my dean and mentor, Doug Bicklin, Rosemary Crossley, who you'll be hearing from tomorrow. And also part of the research that I'm going to be presenting today was done through the Institute, but in conjunction with Zach Rossetti, Harvey Lavoie, and Pascal Chang. So I'm going to start by putting this in some context and then talk about why message passing exists and how it's connected to notions of research and validation, and then why we should think of it as a skill, and what are some of the elements that need to go into any consideration of message passing. Oh, that's funny. I am here from Syracuse, New York. Yes, we are the home of the orange. I know it's a very strange mascot. It is a fruit, but yes, we are home of the University Orange. I'm the director of the Institute on Communication and Inclusion, formerly the Facilitated Communication Institute. I'm a professor at SU in Inclusive Education and Disability Studies. I came at this work as a former teacher, so I came at it from a perspective of how do we think about schools that support a wide range of learners. And then obviously I do a significant amount of research in this area, and I am a facilitator and a trainer of facilitators, although I don't get to do that very often anymore. I think it's imperative that any discussion of research, and particularly validation or message passing research, has to start from a presumption of competence. And as we're going to talk about how message passing should be seen as a skill rather than a test, we have to remember that we start from a presumption that the people we work with and support have important, meaningful things to say. Jamie says, folks, the idea of the presumption of competence means that the desire to see people as intelligent and capable of capturing your listening attention, and a feeling of confidence in the attempts to engage the enormous importance of all the work it has taken to move people like me to places like here. Do not assume your understanding of what is present before you is to be the final answer. Question what you currently believe about someone with a disability. Remember, we can all make dangerous assumptions. I believe this optimistic view is beginning to take hold in education, but for people who are adults, we need to put more strong work in learning how to make successes over long-time silences. Perhaps then it is paramount that we remember the beauty of the potent old golden rule. Presuming competence initiates a fundamental idea that competence is a beginning point to realize the emotion of great self-worth. Jamie is someone who graduated from Syracuse University with degrees in Native American Studies and Religion, and he types to communicate and didn't start speaking until he was 12. He now types with no physical touch and reads aloud what he types. But he is someone that has been in this journey for a long time. Tomorrow, I'm going to give sort of an overview of research on typing to communicate and give a larger framework of what that research has looked like. But today, we're going to focus specifically on this big question. Most of the early research on facilitated communication was all focused on the question of who is it that's doing the typing? Who is the author of the message, and how do we know that? And we all might go, well, that's a really silly question. We, of course, know that the folks that are typing are doing the communicating, but sadly, most of the research questions throughout the first couple of decades in this work were all focused on this issue of who is it that's doing the typing. This comes to this question of validity. In other words, how do we know that someone is typing the thing and that that's really what they meant to say? So before we get into the specifics of how do you think about constructing message passing, we have to recognize there's lots of levels or layers of validity, and we all seem to confuse them into one question when really there are several. There's the validity of facilitated communication as a communication technique. In other words, the big question, does it work? Right? That's really what most of the research was about. But we actually have to think about validity at other levels as well. We have to think about whether this method of communication access is useful for a particular person Not whether it works globally, but do we have evidence that it works for this person? Are they able to do things through typing that they weren't able to do before? Can they communicate ideas better through typed communication than through other methods? Thirdly, we have to consider the validity of a specific message sometimes. So not whether it works globally, not whether it works for that person on a general sense, but occasionally people type a particular message that we need to understand. Is this what they meant to say? Is the thing that they typed verifiable in some way? Day in and day out, we might not be concerned about that. But if somebody types, "My stomach hurts," I want to know that they might need to go to the doctor, right? So we need to know, does that particular message mean what I think it means? So when we talk about validity or passing messages, we have to really know what kind of level of validity we're talking about. And as we look at the research studies, what we're really looking at is, can that particular message be communicated to another person? That has gotten confused with, does that mean FC works? So it was all about validity. And we're going to talk about a little more about defining message passing, but really just a couple of terms that are important to understand, and I'll talk more terminology tomorrow. Message passing is simply passing unknown information. When you hear the term double-blind authorship study, that's an additional layer of complication that we're not doing. So when you talk about double-blind in a research sense, it means that the person, the researcher, doesn't know necessarily what the different groups are looking at. So in other words, you might have a typer on one side, a facilitator on the other, with a line in between them, and the researcher at the far end. And in a double-blind study, it's entirely possible that what the typer is looking at as a stimulus is different than what the facilitator is looking at. And the researcher doesn't know that. That's what makes it double-blind. So just to put it in context, that's what many of the studies were constructed around. That's not what our studies have been constructed around. So I want to just go back. The idea of double-blind is it's supposed to reduce bias. It's supposed to help ensure the verifiability or the control nature of this research. But I want to ask this question, and given the language, I'll just ask you to sort of think about the response to this question. When you look at a setup like that, where potentially the facilitator and the typer are looking at different things, I want you to think about what assumptions are at play here. What are we believing to be true about people that would necessitate that type of research design? And what are the challenges to that type of research methodology? When I've posed that question to typers, I get answers like, they clearly think I'm trying to lie. Or they clearly think I'm not really doing this, that the entire design of a double-blind study seems to start from a presumption of incompetence. It seems to be an attempt to disprove a theory rather than prove it. And while in some research circles that might be seen as the best way to test something, from our perspective, it's not presuming competence or starting from a potential for success. I think it's important to recognize, though, that when we look back at the research history and the number of message passing and double-blind authorship studies that were conducted primarily in the early to mid-90s, we did learn something. We did see that there were outcomes from these studies, whether we liked them or not, right? We learned something. So just briefly, some of what we learned in the studies that were done that did not support authorship, in other words, where evidence of influence was highly, highly probable, the questions were poorly designed. There were very limited or uninteresting things for the person to respond to. In some cases, the participants, the typers, were speakers. In one study, they were college students who didn't even need any sort of support. They were speaking college students that were pulled in off the street to participate. They might be people who have encountered facilitated communication just that day for the very first time. They might have been people who had only been using it for a couple of weeks. In almost every case of these studies, it was the first time that facilitator or that typer had ever been in that research site. It was their first time in that place, first time with that task, and in many cases, first time meeting that facilitator.
That's crazy.
I know, any of you who do this work can already start thinking why these evaluations or assessments were unsuccessful. Often they occurred on only one session or very few sessions with facilitators with little to no experience and only seconds of response time. So these are some of the characteristics of the studies that were not successful. I want to talk about some of the characteristics of the studies that were, and then we'll kind of think about this for a second. For the studies where messages were successfully passed in the early studies, the task was meaningful. They were able to practice. They were able to understand what it was they were being asked to do and then have time with it. They knew their facilitators before they went in. I realize that seems like a necessary requisite to any study of facilitation, but surprise, surprise. If you know the person, it helps. They were in familiar locations. They were done over multiple sessions. The facilitators had had significant training, and they gave them time to respond. So sort of the counter to all of the when they didn't work. Surprise, surprise, folks were more successful in comfortable settings, with comfortable people, with tasks that they had seen before, and where they were able to relax and be in a space that they could be their best, most present and selves in that moment.
So unexpected.
So unexpected. I just keep thinking about, there's a lot of parallels between the early message passing tests and intelligence testing and how, and some of the IQ testing work, and I know we'll hear about that tomorrow as well, but this idea that so many folks we work with perform very, very poorly on typical IQ tests because they require verbal response, responding on demand, highly structured protocols, very few breaks. And yet when those folks are able to engage with assessments that are structured with their sorts of styles of thinking in mind, they're able to demonstrate their understanding. But one of the biggest problems with the early research and what happened in the 90s, particularly in the United States, was that the test became the method. As opposed to looking at message passing as just one way to understand what was happening, the failure of people to accurately pass messages under controlled circumstances equated to facilitated communication doesn't work. And tomorrow I'm going to talk about some illogical fallacies in terms of how we make sense of research or don't make sense of research. But I think it's really important. This quote from Bicklin and Cardinal says, "The effect of the research debate was to frame all discussions of facilitated communication in terms of validity or invalidity, thus tying its meaning to the test. The test ceased to be representations of method. Rather, that situation, identifying pictures, passing message, became synonymous with what FC was. It stopped being about people communicating thoughts and ideas and about, can you respond to this particular demand in the way that I'm constructing it? And when they couldn't, we said that it didn't work." I won't go into this today, but as we know, there's lots of ways to document and demonstrate authorship beyond message passing, and we'll deal with those more tomorrow. And actually, you're going to be hearing about several of these kinds of studies today and tomorrow from folks who did this work. We'll see research on eye tracking. We'll see research on linguistic analysis. We have a lot of folks in the U.S. who have demonstrated the evidence of speaking either while or after typing and speaking aloud what they say. You can collect portfolios of naturally occurring message passing. So there's lots of ways beyond the traditional message passing test that people can demonstrate authorship. But we're going to go back to saying, okay, but if we have to learn to pass messages, how do we help people get better at it? So the rest of what I'm going to talk about is really this idea of what do we mean by message passing, why might it be a skill that's important, and what are the concepts we need to think about to create successful opportunities for it to happen. Just checking time. I realize it's a very American thing to do. Very concerned about time all the time. So, what is message passing? So in a nutshell, it is simply passing unknown information to a naive facilitator. So telling someone something they didn't already know. We often hear this equated to playing the telephone game, right, where you pass, but that's not really, it's simply sharing information with someone that they couldn't know ahead of time, so now they have that information. It's in message passing tasks, more structured, it's when a communicator, a typer, communicates something with their facilitator that that facilitator didn't know already. So as opposed to when we think about set work tasks that are highly predictable and where we have shared information and we're practicing, in message passing, it's really you assume you're telling them something they didn't already know. Why might this be important? So you can ask, okay, so if we know that a lot of the early message passing studies were flawed, which they were, maybe we should just forget message passing. Maybe we should just say this is silly. People don't need to know how to do this. And I would argue, I don't know that I'm pretty sure it's not necessarily a useful way to test a method, but we have to recognize that good communication actually is two-way. I was recently having this discussion with my good friend Jamie Burke and his mom, because Jamie has incredibly figurative, flowery language. Some of you in the room do as well. I know I've heard you present before, and I spend time going, okay, what are they trying to say? With Jamie, I want to make sure I actually get what he's saying to me. It's not enough for him to put those words out into the world if I can't make sense of them. So when we think about message passing more broadly, it's also about ensuring that the communication can be one way, that what the communicator's putting out, the listener is receiving. You want to make sure that they're getting the meaning you're trying to convey. So if we stop thinking about message passing as testing, and we instead thinking about it as we all need to be able to share things that are unknown. I want to be able to see Julia after not seeing her since last May and tell her something about my life that she couldn't have known before, and I want to know that she's understanding me. It builds my confidence as a communicator if when I communicate something, that person responds to me in a way that tells me they got it. And that I can tell them something that is innovative and exciting, and it's heard and understood. And it helps me own and protect my message. When we think about influence, and when we think about what gets done with people's words, I think it's really important to think about message passing as helping people own what they're trying to communicate. If I am able to tell you something and then I'm able to either speak it aloud or my actions convey that or something else happens, that's reinforcing and our communication becomes more reciprocal and more dynamic. So message passing is something that's important. It's also something that's really important in school, which we'll talk about. But message passing happens in multiple ways. There are, what I talk about is 3 big kinds of message passing. Natural or incidental message passing, which happens all the time. Informal message passing, and formal message passing. And I'll talk about each of these, and then it's formal message passing that Julia is going to talk about with her study. Natural or incidental message passing is that stuff that just happens. We didn't create a context for it, we didn't seek it out, but someone tells me something, and then I find out later that information gets verified. So it's as simple as, you see this in school all the time. You might have a typer studying at home with one facilitator, and then taking a test with another. The example you gave over dinner last night, over the literature exam, right? Where the facilitator hadn't read the book. But the typer typed something that was really truly about that text. That's natural message passing. You type about something and then you go do it with someone else. You tell somebody, I'm thinking about going skating today, and then you go skating with another person. They didn't know that was happening. Or when someone will come in and talk about what they did over the weekend. And then you find out later, oh yeah, they typed about Uncle Tommy being in town, and sure enough, that had happened. So it's those moments, and I would encourage you to write those down, document them. Keep a portfolio of those moments, because it's the accumulation of those moments that I would argue builds a compelling body of evidence, far more compelling than what we do in a formal study. So it's the natural stuff that happens. And then informal message passing is really similar, the only difference being you're prompting it. In informal message passing, I think of it as, all of us who are parents have those moments when we tell our kids, tell grandma what you did yesterday. Ooh, can you tell so-and-so about the zoo? What animal did you see? So you are prompting that message passing, but it's still natural in that that person doesn't know what you did, right? Or if you ask about unknown information, but it's not in a structured setting. So this is really similar to incidental, the only difference being I consider it informal message passing because we're sort of creating a context for message passing to happen, as opposed to it just showing up on its own. The third kind of message passing is the formal kind. And this is where we create a context. We create a research setting. And we schedule a message passing task over multiple sessions. We have a protocol that we follow. We start seeming really researchy, right? We have steps we're going to use, and we're going to follow them consistently from person to person. As somebody who writes for publication, writes manuscripts, this is the only kind of stuff I can get published, right? I can write all the beautiful... Maybe. Or try really hard. Yeah, we'll talk about that tomorrow as well. If we're trying to consider something research, it has to be formal message passing. So the idea of formal message passing is consistency, documentation, and really making sure that you are setting up a context wherein somebody can do their best possible work. Oh, what happened? I'm missing a slide. Oh, sorry, something got out of order. I don't know how I did that. So I'm just going to talk to you very briefly about this study. So several years ago, we've steered clear of message passing studies at the Institute as a whole. I will tell you partly because the history around message passing research in the US is so tortured that we don't tend to engage in a lot of message passing research. We haven't historically. Partly because given that our work is structured around a presumption of competence, doing message passing felt in some ways like we were responding to the needs of critics rather than the needs of our typers. At the same time, I recognize the world that we live in, and this is the kind of research that counts to the scholarly community. So several years ago, my colleague Zach Rossetti, along with two master trainers, Pascal Chang and Harvey Lavoie, folks from Vermont, we created a project together where they worked with 6 participants' teams. Each participant team would have a communicator, a support facilitator, and a naive facilitator. They got together over a regular basis for several weeks and months to do a series of activities, pointing at words, pointing at pictures, an activity they called I Have Something to Tell You, which is sort of that more natural form, reading a short story and engaging around it, and reading newspaper articles and engaging around them. The individual typers got to choose which activity they wanted to work on that day, although they were encouraged to use all of them at some point. They collected data, both videotaped data as well as written data on the process. The communicator would practice first with their support facilitator, practice typing about whatever the activity was. Then that support facilitator would leave, the naive facilitator would come in, and they would try to reproduce what was communicated. So a very simple, basic message passing design. Out of this study, out of the 6 participants, and these are not their real names, 130 out of 279 messages were scored as being successfully passed. One participant only successfully passed one message. It was incredibly difficult for that participant. all the way to Jen, who passed 100% of her messages. Every task she tried, she was 100% effective. Everyone else was in between, with 3 of the participants about 50% successful. We were doing metaphorical cartwheels in the office when we got this data. We went just shy of 50% of these messages were passed. We can get this research published. Somebody is going to see that people can do this. I believe the study was sent out for review 6 times to different journals, and it was rejected every single time because the students only passed 50% of the messages, and so it couldn't be published. If any of you understand how research works, that's not how it's supposed to be. We don't decide whether or not to publish something because it was successful or not. You publish it because it's research, but it was never published, so we published it internally on our website. But we saw from this that people could be successful. We saw from this that for some of these students, while the task was hard, they were able to overcome that. Some of the things they said were challenging were the expected things. Anxiety. They didn't like the camera. Nobody likes the camera. And we didn't even have like the cool glasses and stuff, but yeah. They said that it was really different depending on what facilitator they were working with. They reported things like word finding challenges, getting stuck with automatics and not being able to stop themselves because of the anxiety from typing automatic responses. And some of them had different amounts of practice, so those were the things that made it challenging. The things that helped were unexpected. Familiar context, a climate that wasn't about testing but was just about practicing a skill, lots of time in lots of ways, unlimited breaks. This was huge. Being able to take a break anytime somebody wanted to and then coming back to it. Unlimited amounts of rehearsal. The person got to decide when they were ready. So they wouldn't just look at it and practice it once. They could practice it multiple times before the naive facilitator left. So this is really consistent with the earlier research that we looked at. The difference being in this study is they got a lot more choice. There were some people who always wanted to do words, and there were some people who always wanted to do pictures, and that was really important. Even with all those positive sort of things that were in place and the success, this is just a few sample comments from some of the participants. Even with all those good things in place, they still felt incredibly stressed. All but one of the participants loved it. She loved coming in and showing it how easy it was for her, and you can guess which one that was. But it's interesting, all 3 of the men in this study, 3 of the men reported feeling incredibly stressed by it. I thought that the second one was really particularly important. It feels like a test of my intelligence, and I worry how my missed words are perceived. It's a whole other topic, but if we wanted to talk about theory of mind, you would argue that this is sort of blows that out of the water. This idea that people don't understand what other people are thinking. Trey was so aware not only of that he was being tested, but he was thinking about how other people would perceive the results of his evaluation. My nerves were wacky. My mom went away that Saturday. We also recognized how people's personal lives, personal circumstances with their facilitators, with what's happened at school, impacts their ability to perform in that assessment. And it reinforced what we know about bodies performing differently under different conditions. So when we talk about proprioception and body regulation, the impact of life situations and stress on your ability to perform. So we have been doing what I call an ongoing ICI project, and I put it in air quotes because we are still not calling it research. I think I've got people on board that we can actually start like videotaping and collecting data in the spring, but people in Syracuse in particular are very, very, very hesitant to engage in a message passing study because of the number of times that many people in the Syracuse area have been publicly humiliated on the internet, in research articles, by name, because of things that they have typed. That isn't something that happens here in the same way. You are very lucky. Do all the research you can in Italy. So we have 5 folks currently, and we're hoping to add a couple more, ranging in age from 11 to 27, that have been part of this project so far. And they just come together every couple of weeks to practice message passing in the office. And it's been funny. We've been trying to build this and build this and build this and talk about it. And we have 2 people who pass 100% of their messages. They still have been nervous about it being research. And we are similar to the study in Vermont. We've changed one element from theirs. Individual words on flashcards, objects, actual physical objects that they describe. Folks like doing that. Flashcard pictures, scenes, as opposed to just flashcards like simple line drawings. But one of our participants always wants to do videos. He wants to watch National Geographic videos and then talk about them with someone else. And I'll talk about why that is in a minute. And so we've been spending this time over this last year as researchers, not doing research. It's really interesting. But as trainers and as a team, and we consider these folks that are part of this, they're part of our research team because they're actually helping us design what's going to be the research project. Jamie, and in particular Burke, we see him as a co-researcher because he gives us feedback on what makes sense and what doesn't as we design the protocol. So we're trying to really nail down what are key components for task design so that this could be replicable other places, knowing that as soon as it becomes a formal research project, it's going to change. So out of our study, just a few things that have come out, our non-study study, that they have told us, and they are all fine with this being shared, even though it's not a research project. So it's really funny. I'm not usually have to trip over things as much. Jamie has a description. He says in his brain, he has a movable brain image. Everything he makes sense of, he processes through video images in his brain. This is actually the person who types so metaphorically. And so for him, while he can pass any message passing task, whether it's words or pictures, he far prefers to write about videos because that fits and aligns with how he already processes and makes sense of the world. So task design really matters in recognizing that that's highly individualized. He's the only person that really wants to do that. One of the things that's been really interesting with one of our typers, Sujit talks about the fact that he is an extremely proficient and experienced typer, but he keeps bringing on new facilitators because he's a college student right now. And as they come in, their skill levels are different. So with most people, he types two-handed. But he can't do that in message passing because not all of his facilitators can. And he finds it very difficult to practice doing the practice task two-handed and then switch to one-handed with the naive facilitator and vice versa. It does something to how he remembers and processes the language that when he doesn't do the same motoric pattern, he can't remember the words the same way. So all of we now have adapted, so anytime he does message passing, it has to be one-handed, regardless of who's supporting him, because it's really struggling for him. We also have to pay attention, that should be 2 come in after school, to when we're scheduling. We're having real issues with fatigue and that folks are coming to our office after being in school all day, and they just can't handle that. Other things around anxiety, but the big thing I want to mention, and this has been really hard for me, some people just don't have any interest in doing this, and we can't make them. And part of presuming competence is also presuming people get to say, we have one person who's really connected with our institute. He's a long-term typer. He's a person with Down syndrome that is this amazing activist and political actor, and we just want him in this study because he has such interesting things to say, and he just keeps saying, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not playing that game. You want to involve me in any other research, I'll do it. I will not do message passing. It is insulting. And when I thought about it, this is someone who was denied an education because he couldn't prove his competence in school. So the last thing I want to close with that's going to lead into what Julie is going to talk about is if you put all these things together, if we come back to where we started, message passing tests are not the same thing as facilitated communication. And we have to be really careful to recognize that there are many, many, many reasons why someone might not be able to pass a message that has nothing to do with them not being successful communicators. And everything from anxiety, difficulty with word finding. This is one of my favorites. I was just talking with Marilyn Chadwick about this. They might have something else they want to tell you. And you designing this study and making them type about that word, they had something else they wanted to say. The facilitators might be poorly trained, might not be about the typer. We might not have given them enough time. This one is huge to me as an inclusive educator. If people haven't had access to school, they haven't done tasks like this. They've never been treated as somebody that can answer questions or respond to something. This is also huge, and I think of this with Jamie. We assume everybody sees or makes sense of objects the same way. When I look at something and Jamie looks at something, we're going to report completely different qualities of that object or experience because we're different people and we see the world differently. I always joke, my husband's an engineer and I'm this, and so we look at things and he sees structural forces and load-bearing walls, and I go, isn't that pretty, right? Those are not the same thing. The choice really, they might need a different way of responding. Difficulties with working memory, which is something that we're realizing, we just assume that's in place. That might be the challenge. And this is a huge one. The lexical traits or the lexical features people utilize or draw on. You're going to hear research about this, but we know some people want to describe things, whereas other people name them, right? And that can come across differently in a message passing task. So all of these factors have to be considered. If you're going to even think about or start trying to conceptualize what would be an effective way to evaluate message passing abilities. So, I want to thank you very much for your time. I know it's challenging when you're dealing with translation, and so I really appreciate you sticking with me. And now you're going to get to see this contextualized in an example that involves lots of people in this room. So thank you. Grazie mille. Thank you very much. I got us caught up a little. Now they all take theirs off and I put mine on.
Luca, Mary, Edo, Giovanni, Esther.
Yeah.
Chi ha partecipato a Message Passing ha voglia di venire qui da me.
So I invite here on stage some voices, so some sort of voices that can share their message passing experience with us.
Com'è che esco? Ok. Tra un po'. Voi venite? Venite a raccontare un po'? grazie mille ragazzi di essere qua. Ma dov'è la Renata? Renata?
Sono 3 sedie.
Ah, grazie mille. Perfetto, che forse lui viene a sedersi qua davanti. Facili tu? Facili tu Esther? Ah, ok. Sì, benissimo. Benissimo, dai che ci siamo.
Okay, we're almost there.
No, guarda, sarebbero qua sotto, ma adesso
Cosa?
è tanto scarico il computer. Perché se no stacchiamo un attimo questo qua che sarà carico. Ok, questo qua possiamo staccare un attimo dopo, poi
E questo da staccare?
sì, un secondo. Vediamo quanto è carico quello. Allora, stacchiamo questo. Ah, questo è il tuo.
Quindi qual è che ha bisogno del carico? Hai già attaccato?
Sì, manca.
Ah, il tuo è questo. Ah, ho capito. Sì, sì.
Ora questo qua è senza batteria, quindi appena riusciamo lo rimettiamo in carica. Come funziona adesso?
Quanto mi dura questo? Ah, forte. Partiamo.
Sono loro, quindi cambi il cavo tra poco.
Man mano cambiamo il cavo quando hanno finito di scrivere.
Il cavo però ha una lunghezza, non è che lo prende in fondo.
Vabbè, vi faccio passare il computer.
Speriamo di non...
Sì, 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 sì. Allora, ragazzi, quando avete finito di scrivere, ci fate un segno, microfono, Allora, quando avete finito di scrivere, me lo fate.
So please let me know when you finish writing so that we can take the computer and connect it to the main screen so that we can project your writings. So in the meantime, we can start. I have plenty of things to do. So anything you want to say, I mean, it's up to you. You can share your experiences about what you have done. You're free to express what you want. Well, especially your comments. Yeah, feel free. Just feel free to express anything you want. No, don't be scared at all. Just express yourselves. So today I'm going to tell you briefly about the pilot project that we launched 2.5 years ago together with Luca and Mary, among the most experienced users of FC of our association, because they've been using that for many years, and we have tested several message passing modes. So all the modes expressed by Christy, words, images, is something we have tested, and we said ourselves, let's start, let's try, and as soon as you're going to get more experience through also home testing, send me feedback, and then we can meet and talk, and from that on we have gathered testimonies, and then we have developed a sort of message passing training that is not a real well-defined protocol. I mean, it's very personalized and customized, so it's more about some key principles that then need to be differently applied and put into practice by each individual according to their specificity. So we're going to show you the testing, and also I'll tell you more about the final outcome. So first of all, I want to say that Mary and Luca that did this work and somehow opened up the way for this kind of work are also facilitated by two top facilitators, Renza and Barbara, they are the directors of the Livorno and Gorizia centers. So we started certainly in the best possible way on all aspects. So I will start from the first things that Mary and Luca told me about their message basic experience. Mary said it's easier with a single stimulus and not with a choice. So, but if thinking about the stimuli, she was preferring to get a word or an image to pass instead from choosing from a set of them. Other people prefer other methodologies. So we understood from the beginning that it's a lot about personal preferences. And then we asked why sometimes, you sort of want to look at the stimulus again. And Reza was getting out of the room and she was looking at the stimulus again. Because I don't remember, I sort of get blocked and I need to look again. So something we understood from day one was that there was a sort of background issue in terms of working memory. So this is something we're going to delve into during the presentation. Is it different to write through a non-informed facilitator? Because as Christine said, sometimes when you use the FC daily, there are some natural message cases, but sometimes we say, is it different if you know that the facilitator is not aware of that thing? The answer was, stress goes up because I feel less sure touch, and so the words get lost in my mind and I find them difficulty. So I remember that the first time I saw that Mary's attitude was very, very sort of, let's say, fighting. Maybe Renza was more perplexed somehow. And Mary then wrote, proper training to face this. To face what the test implies is the basic requirement for a good outcome. So training. Again, this is a skill that can be developed. Well, Luca is very open and direct and decided it's boring. It's important to keep motivation high. So the fact that such an activity is boring has been reaffirmed by him many, many times. And this has been very important to realize, as Christy said, that some people could not love this kind of work because it can be seen as boring and repetitive. And Mary, during the testing phase, said that passing single images reminded her about a bad experience at school when she was asked to do things far below her mental skills. So keeping motivation high, reinforcing the deployed effort is something that is going to come back in my presentation because this is one of the crucial issues. And then we asked Luca what did he feel when he had difficulties? Was that a short memory problem? He said, oh yes, enormously. And from day number one, we understood that the difficulty to retain in short memory a stimulus, a word that was not meaningful, not relevant, not part of a context of a discourse, of a work, was rather hard. And another thing that I remember very well from the test moment with Luca, and as I did with Mary, I ended up in his place and I said, oh, let's start with a pilot, let's start doing something and see how it goes with simple images, so with complex words. So description of images was chosen at random by the father from a dictionary, opening up randomly, or sort of choosing words from texts he knew with the more well-known vocabulary. And Luca said, so come on, I would like to do as I was trained for. So we saw a difference, a personal difference in facing the test, because Mary, I think, lived the test as a challenge with herself, with the world. Let's see how it goes. Let's test anything. And Luca, on the contrary, said, it's boring. I have problems with my short memory, so I want to proceed as I was trained for. And these are some remarks that were written by Mary and Luca at the end of the whole journey. Mary said the test they accepted to join seems simple. At the end of the day, it's about writing a word, so making sure that you have memorized it. Actually, you feel in your head, the confusion of anxiety, and sort of it's not easy to retain the word to be written. And then you feel the touch of the facilitator that gets uncertain, and so anxiety increases. So to retain the word, you need to be self-controlled, and you need to proceed gradually. And so it is required a long training in order to do such a test. In designing such a test, you need to consider several elements, because this process involves a little bit of the cognitive aspect, but most of all, it involves the relational and emotional part. So as Mary is very complete, and I have sort of emphasized the parts that I consider as most meaningful. That may seem easy, but actually there's a lot of skills and things to be done behind it. Retaining a word in the memory requires a lot of self-control and an active effort, and this is something that is not automatic. And so there's also an emotional part that has to do with the test, that has to do with the facilitator, that maybe gets a bit uncertain, and this is also very important to be considered. Luca said instead, first of all, I would like to address my colleagues that are forced to writing. Please consider this opportunity as a liberation, because the tools that are proposed as by researchers as being recognized as authors of our writings maybe are not always pleasant, but please accept them with dignity. My suggestion is let's try to get trained and to practice, maybe with not too long sessions, maximum 30 minutes for me. Then the facilitator will have to verify and control our emotions. To the scientific community, I want to say thank you, and I hope that the attention will increase so that prejudice will decrease.
Penso che
Well, I think that both Mary and Luca already expressed everything, and their remarks are perfectly in line with what Christius just explains about the different approaches to the test. Well, as I said, message passing training, these training when it comes to the practical side can mean very different things according to the recipient person. What remains stable are the basic principles. So the core is the same for everybody, and then I can tell you about different modes of implementation. But the most important thing of this work, what Mary and Luca taught us in the beginning, and also the other people you see here, are these basic principles. First of all, and I put them in two languages in order to be clearer. So, first of all, as I said, every training needs to be personalized. So there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And then, the training has to do a lot with the communicator and the facilitator. This is important to be underscored, because in some previous trainings there was a sort of get familiar period, but the burden of the proof was always on the person communicating through the technique and not on the couple, on the pair. In the case of Mary and Renza, we saw that maybe Renza was even more anxious than Mary, so the testing moment is for both. So the training is as much for the facilitator as it is for the FC user. And the aim of the MP cannot be obvious for the FC user. So you need to explain and constantly support the importance of the user's effort. Unfortunately, Alessandro, for schooling reasons, can't be here with us today, but I will tell you a lot about his journey because it's very interesting. And it went hand in hand with the message passing training. And it started in a bad way. Well, not such a great way, let's say. And this is even more interesting because, his results are almost flawless. He did an extraordinary work. And his facilitator, Donatella, thanks to Antonella's support, overcame all the tests and did a portfolio work, as Christy would say, that was remarkable. And there was a very important episode, because at one point, Alessandro had not clear ideas about the goal of the test. So it was not that clear to him why he had to do that. And for Antonella and Donatella, on the contrary, it was crystal clear. And on that occasion, Donatella specifically explained to Alessandro the reason why for that work that was a training for both. And from that time on, Alessandro, apart a few mistakes, started passing the messages perfectly. And this is very meaningful because, maybe in the eyes of a researcher, this may be obvious because what message passing is, because within FC, message passing has been there all the time. But instead, it's important to express the reason why for exercise it may seem strange. And failing an attempt is not a proof of the absence of paternity, but can be discouraging and demotivating, supporting resilience by always ending a session with a success. This is a guiding principle given to us by Brunetta, and I think it should be applied to anybody in life in general. But when it comes to such a complex and complicated things, keeping resilience is very important by ending each session with success. So if the session is not going well, okay, no problem, just lower the level of the test, so something easier, and close with a success so that everybody will get home happy and satisfied with a good feeling, with a good sensation. So there is really a specific positive internal narrative feeling. It is also very important to previously talk to the families and relatives, stakeholders in general. And even before knowing the final outcome, it's important to know that failing an attempt is not a proof of the absence of paternity, not at all. So, this is a basic requirement. If you do not start from this assumption, doing this kind of work is useless. So if you do not keep this basic requirement as a fundamental aspect, it may even be dangerous. And so training needs to be constant and repetitive, as Mary and Lucas said, and especially at the beginning, use salient stimuli. So because some things can be boring or repetitive, some words, there can be a bit of anxiety, a fear. So start with things that the person knows very well and loves. Giovanni, I didn't see him, but maybe will join us later on. There's not enough room, but we're going to have a turnover. Loves science in general. Giovanni adores technology. So I know that at the beginning of his journey, used a lot of words about climate events, winds, the different winds blowing in Europe. If a person loves food, use food. If people, knows some objects very well, or use the objects that a person sees every day that surround that person. So you always start from stimuli that are salient to the person, that are relevant to the person, so that in the beginning, the short memory effort can be supported, at least in the beginning, by the sort of familiarity and sort of knowledge of the stimulus. It was off the mic, but I think that the person said that this boy loves chocolate. And what did we hear from the pilot and the training? What did we learn from the pilot and the training? That, the main problems have to do with the working memory and attention. We're not going to delve into the deep connection between these two aspects here today, but still, these two aspects are very important. And all the people you see here, and maybe apart from Giovanni M., all the people here saw this as the main difficulty, together with the management of emotions as the main obstacle to be overcome. Secondly, message passing requires a specific management of emotions and relationships because there's a special relation to the boredom, the difficulty, the test itself. And the message passing training perfectly fits into autonomy promoting pathways. And I'm going to delve a bit more into this in relation to Alessandro's pathway. And message passing, yes, is something that aims, in our case, essentially at research, but actually it increases the sense of empowerment, the self-esteem and self-assurance of the people involved, so of both people, and leads to more autonomy in the communication. So from a pure clinical point of view, this training is very beneficial in terms of communication autonomy. And this applies to almost, people in general terms. I don't know if it's relevant to Luca because you already had a quiet sort of self-esteem and relevance sense. Maybe for younger people, these can be even more important. So we saw intangible benefits that cannot be quantified in research terms, but that prove to have beneficial effects maybe in relational terms at school, for instance. So there are some preparatory activities that can be carried out to better support these three key aspects. Well, I'll try to go through them very briefly. So as I said, Alessandro did the message passing training, but also did a specific autonomy promoting pathway. And he said, I take the world and I try to project it in the part where I rectify the news and some things are lost because they did not remain in my short memory. Alessandro did not study psychology. He's a high school student, but he's very well aware of how he works, of his own mechanisms, and he told us which are the difficulties he has in terms of working memory. Many things can be done. I'm convinced that tomorrow Rosemary Crossing will tell us more about a lot of applications with iPad that are much better than these things on this list. So I want to dwell on this. I want to elaborate on this because I think we're lagging a bit behind when it comes to this. So memory games, word games, sequences of numbers, many things can be done to improve and reinforce the working memory. It's a cognitive issue. It's a matter of training, of repeating, like training a muscle. Can you hear me?
Se no le passiamo quelle pennette. È meraviglioso avere qualcuno che si occupa di queste cose tecniche.
It's beautiful to have somebody dealing with technical issues and stay here calm and relaxed.
C'è questo problema del... Barbara, fa fare figuracce? Chiedo. No? Non lo so, tu hai visto cosa ha scritto, io no? Chiedo.
Io no, ora, perché questa sarebbe da analizzare per il facilità. Io al momento in cui finisce di scrivere non mi ricordo.
Brunetta dice sempre che segue la parola.
Allora, funziona? Sì.
Fantastico.
Dunque.
No.
Ecco, allora rimettilo come era prima, tanto lo stesso, se mi sposto io. Ciao a tutti, ci risiamo, tutti insieme appassionatamente.
Hello everybody, let's start all together to talk about message passing. Many people know that I don't particularly love it. In particular, I do not like the rigor of the mode. I do not understand completely the need to pass a message that is textless, and so I don't like it, and I will surrender the need of research. I know that for the researcher, if reaching human sense, or so the analysis of the proof can be a bit sort of sterile. But even though my memory is strange, it's quite useful, and it's important, especially when the communication exchange is effective.
Glielo passi sul computer? Arriva? Se no avviciniamo il computer. Giovanni, non me lo distrarre.
Giovanni, please do not distract our technician. You can ask questions later on. So I read what Eduardo wrote. He wrote, it was hard work. The level of stress faced with failure was enormous. Finding motivation again was very difficult, but then seeing that it was improving and combining with the awareness that could be useful for other people was giving me new motivation, and so I went on. At the end, my own self-image had improved enormously. It is certain that being here today is a big satisfaction. It's a dream coming true. It's a dream about to come true. So a future when our intelligence is going to be acknowledged. Hello.
Esther, la mia esperienza...
Esther. Sorry?
La mia esperienza più bella...
My most beautiful experience was certainly the one I lived through the participation to this research. My main issue is to feel somehow enhanced, and I have never been motivated, and I've never had guarantees of being successful.
Vedete voi. Abbiamo 4 postazioni, se poi qualcuno viene. No. Sì. sì, sì, buona idea. Esther. Sì, perfetto. Dicevamo delle cose che abbiamo imparato fondamentalmente
When it comes to the management of emotions and the relation, it's important to be mindful about boredom and motivation. Ending always with success, we should really engrave this in our minds. This is basic in the kind of work we do. Sharing our insecurities as facilitators. And, well, there have been cases where facilitators were honest and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, Enstra and Ramata. We had her primary facilitator who is very, very motivated, but on the first day was a bit worried, the cameras, the test, and so Esther told her, don't worry, everything's going to be alright. I'm not perfect. Perfection does not exist. Everything's going to be alright. And then the test sort of was carried out differently. It's important to be on the same level playing field and express anxiety. So let's try to sort of get rid of anxiety. And again, showing that we're both in front of cameras, we're together. We are as one is two that are going to put to the same level of test. So the burden of the proof is not up to the person communicating through FC, not at all. It's something that has to do with the whole team that is working on that and reassuring and supporting the conviction about the certainty of success, as Christy said. As Rosemary also says, the presumption of competence needs to be the fil rouge, and always underscore successes, and always end up with a success. And always keep in mind that social judgment, even though it's not present in a room, is part of the lived experience of any FC user. And Alessandro says, our problem is that we have always been under so much pressure, and we are feared and we are scared of making mistakes. So is this kind of chapter will be never ending? And the destabilizing pressure of the world starting us has the same feeling of a persecution. I think that this is very, very clear, especially when Alessandro talk about this persecutory nature, because if you always need to show and to prove that you're intelligent enough, that you're smart enough all through your life, of course this kind of pressure never goes away. It's always with you at all times. It's something that we should never forget, and instead this seems to be at the back of their minds, and so we need to consider that and never forget this constant pressure. And Luca says, I understand the need of research and the constraint of research, so I'll try to do my best for the best possible results. When Luca wrote this, just before starting the task with the camera at his place, I remember this world very well, because Luca, allow me to say, is a person that has developed such a great competence in use the technique, is self-assured, is a successful case somehow. He's very skilled. He's a person that rarely shows insecurity. And so the fact that he was writing this, oh my gosh, was very meaningful to me, coming from such a strong personality and such a skilled and competent person. Mary wrote a very disappointing school experience, reminding my mind when an humiliating program about stupid things, underestimating my real skills, trying to be applied to me. So sometimes things can be considered as somehow humiliating or demotivating. So Mary was asked to do things that reminded her of things she was asked to do when she was at high school, but that they were of a primary school level. So let's be careful and let's consider the social judgment aspect and also the personal experience aspect, because this is part of the kind of research work we do. As to autonomy, I would like to make a specific presentation on this, but this is not the case now. And Alessandro made an extraordinary journey, and it came to the center 2 years ago, maybe longer, I don't remember, 2 years and a half. Okay, and well, at one point, he ended up in our center and said, I want to be supported in order to become autonomous in writing and helped in communicating. He has such a great insight about his own internal functioning. And at the beginning, we started writing what you wrote, from the date, the name, the greetings, short sentences, verbs, nouns, and so on. And then with Donatella, he started to work on writing, and we put up a sort of syllabus through trial and error. We also had suggestions by Dr. Vitali and then Cecilia, and then we adjusted things, and we set up a syllabus based on many writing exercises, completing, helping in setting up longer phrases, and simulating a message passing in natural condition, as Christy said, expressing metaphoric expressions and explaining them. But unfortunately, this is not the place and the time to do that. But actually, today, Alessandro talks, and he could not talk in the past. Well, now he can express long and complex sentences. He can be autonomous when it comes to writing, and maybe he won't write a whole essay, but he can write texts, and he achieved extraordinary results. I'm convinced that the work he did on autonomy is the reason for these great achievements. And so message passage training is based on training. So again, the key principles are the ones I expressed beforehand, and then you can carry out several activities. I can have 6 objects or figures or images or objects on a table, and so the facilitator is not blind, and the person is going to choose one and then write about it, or maybe the facilitator is choosing one and then turn, and so when the facilitator enters back, is not aware of the single stimulus, but there's a pool of stimuli that are then maybe later increased. You can choose a word. You can use a word chosen by another facilitator, or using 2 connected words. While a single word is easy to be retained in memory, for other people is different. So some people find it easier to use a short sentence or 2 words connected, because this increases the meaningfulness of the stimulus, so memory retaining is easier. So that's why we worked with nouns and adjectives, the grey cat, for instance, and so on. So words can be chosen randomly by magazines, websites, books, things the person knows. So a silent stimulus is very important. Many people that participated also produced their own text from final dissertation paper or other things, and so try to use familiar words, or maybe a short sentence written beforehand, short before, by this very same person with another facilitator. So we can see what it works, and then we can go on. So there's a high level of psychological variability in the specific implementation modes, so each individual is different. Another interesting phenomenon is self-dictation. So people that have some verbal skills, while they're waiting for the person to get out of the room and then come back, they try to repeat with a low voice words. This is great for working memory and language development. Maybe it's not that good for other reasons, because then that round could not be considered as valid if the word is heard by the other person. And then there are different sensory responses. So some people respond better to visual stimuli, others to hearing stimuli. I show an example with Mary, and I used to read out loud a word and then writing on a piece of paper. She was looking at me like, okay, I'm patient. Well, actually, I don't need you to write it down. It was so self-evident, but we had already started at that, so we needed a constant mode. So, but she was expressing with her eyes. I mean, it was more than enough to me to hear it. Other people instead needed to see it visually in order to remember it much easier. So again, working memory responds differently according to the most preferred sensory stimulus. Okay, I will finish this slide and then we will hear what he has to say. So for now, 8 people have joined the test. Others are working on the training, and 2 may be ready to register data. For some, training is essential. I think about Alessandro, that started not that well and was so successful. And then also with Mary, you had tried some years ago for the first time, and then everything went well. Instead, there were 2 cases that, in my opinion, training was not necessary. They started well, and in particular, in one case, the case of Giovanni, he had to overcome some tests, but actually, he was stronger on the very first day. He did not need training, and if we have a look at Esther preparatory work, I think that in this case as well, maybe, well, familiarity could be helpful, but she was strong from the very beginning. So again, there's a high level of variability from individual to individual. So by increasing the number of participants, we'll see, what is maybe more necessary than other things. I'll shift to Giovanni.
Ecco qua.
Giovanni prima ha scritto
Giovanni wrote, I remember that time. So he wrote, I remember that time. It was a time of deep stress when I also questioned my own skills. It was important to feel that Brunetta was relaxed. Writing words that she didn't know confirmed my autonomy, and I felt more independent. I write, not her. Please shout it out for us.
applausi, l'avete letto?
Big round of applause. He also wrote it. Big round of applause.
Ci siamo? Non ci siamo. Sì, è questo, ok. Questo computer è vecchio. Questa andava benissimo ai suoi tempi. È datato.
Era finito dentro la maglia, mi chiedevo cosa fosse. Bella, bella.
Allora Luca,
Grande.
non lo ecco, lascia stare. La, co- la condivisione
Well, you know, sharing activities between the facilitated person and the facilitator is something fundamental for me in order to calibrate my feelings, and will probably touch would not be important if we didn't have this condition. Esther? Well, I mainly believe pressure. I lived during the tests at home. Participating in Gorizia was very funny. It was a game. Counting on enjoyment and playing is fundamental. I don't know if your facilitator agrees with you. Maria Chiara, when you load a person that has many problems due to her conditions of disability, who has to demonstrate some things that many refuse, means still having a long way to go towards acknowledgement of equality and respect from the others. Doing these tests gives certainly lots of energy, without any doubt, to be considered when doing message passing. The risk is that the credibility of facilitated communication might fail. When you structure the test, you will have to accurately select people with a long practice in order to keep our anxiety and the facilitator's anxiety under control. You know, with these dynamics, I always feel that I do long speeches, theoretical speeches, and then they come here and with just one sentence, they recap what I said during the previous half hour. I'm not a very short person. I'm not very able to make it short. I know to cut it short. So now let's have a look at a few more things. With regard to the pilot, Mary will transmit 32 total stimuli between words and images, and also complex images. So she passed 27 stimuli perfectly, 84.4%. Let's have a look at the mistakes, which don't affect the message passing test. And then I would like to say when we can accept a mistake and when a mistake is not acceptable. One omission, one inversion per se becomes presi, one omission, one redundancy, and one phonetic interference, and one another mistake. Instead of impallidiva, it became impallideva. So these mistakes don't really have a huge impact on the message passing. So the message could be transmitted with efficiency. Then when Mary came to Nottingham, to our office, in order to participate in the study we'll mention tomorrow, we said, well, since we're here, shall we do another test, another message passing test with the Googles, with Mary and Renza. So Mary accepted, and she transmitted 27 stimuli, multiple frequency. As I said, in the initial pilot, Mary and Luca received a very different stimuli. So we didn't calculate the frequency. And, well, in this case, yes, we calculated the frequency. It was actually Giovanni who prepared a list of words with a different frequency in the Italian language. We had the eye tracking glasses and she passed 100% of perfect stimuli. And we also asked her to transmit or to pass some words with capital letters in the middle of the word. For example, insect. She was a bit doubtful, and she asked if she understood correctly, and actually she did. And well, considering the multiple mechanisms of mutual influence that we may have, we decided to video record all the things we did during those tests. So now I'm going to show you a video of Mary and Antonella in the lab.
Come vedete, quello che noi abbiamo fatto a casa di me.
As you can see, this is what we did in the lab, and we positioned the cameras in order to map the entire room. So there's no blind spot, there's no area that is not recorded by the camera. And so we recorded this procedure, the person that comes inside, the stimuli given to Mary. In all the cases, we used 2 door rooms. So there's one person coming in, and the facilitator then came in from the other door as soon as the previous person went out. So you can see Giovanni and I were looking towards the wall in order not to have any kind of interaction with Antonella that comes in order to facilitate Mary that passes the stimulus. Knocking the door, and we turn towards the wall. Then Antonella comes in. So Antonella comes in, she facilitates Mary in writing the word, and then Antonella goes out, and I'm passing another word to Mary, and then she starts again. So this is the standard procedure. The only difference is that we use the glasses and that this is actually a room with just 1 door, while we use the 2 door rooms in all the other cases. But in some cases we used up to 6 cameras to make sure that the entire room was mapped. So everybody had to be able to observe what we were doing. So all right, let's go back to my presentation.
Ok, Luca che fece invece pochi giorni dopo quello di Mary, passò 42 stimoli.
So Luca passed 42 total stimuli, and between words and simple images. And well, he actually passed 28 perfectly, which is 66.6%. As you can see, there are some little mistakes, some phonetic or semantic mistakes, some phonetic interferences. Pietro, for example, becomes Piero, and then some other mistakes. For example, contro becomes cimitero, mica becomes manica. So there are some phonetic problems, but the word was not fixed or anchored precisely. So again, 66% of precise passing. And then we added the mistakes, the accepted ones, and well, after we added the accepted mistakes, the percentage will resulted to be a bit higher. So then we extended this idea to some other people from our association. 6 have already undergone the test with cameras. We have some other people that are getting ready now. They will take the test next year. So, well, we have decided to better structure the stimuli. So we took from a pool of 500,000 Italian words collected by the university. Well, we excluded foreign words, or we also excluded short words with less than 4 letters. And then we made a list of 69 stimuli, different frequencies. So from very highly frequent words to very rare words. And so we have this list of 29 names, 15 adjectives, 8 adverbs, 1 preposition, 16 verbs. Regarding the verbs, well, totally different verbs. And so, well, and we used all past tenses and future, etc. It was well, quite of a tiring job. And then we also made a list of double words like name and adjective or name and verb or short sentences. Something interesting, you know, when you work with people and while you are collecting data, you have to adjust a few things. So Giovanni collected the data together with who? Edoardo. And then Giovanni M came in. Giovanni M is a very ironic person. And together with his mum, Brunella, we noticed that when Brunella passed a simple high-frequency word to him, he nodded and passed it with no problem. But then when Brunella passed him a longer word, lower frequency, a bit more rare, he always smiled. He was happy. He was happy with that. And also, he's very ironic. Actually, I didn't really know him so well. I'd only briefly met him another time before that. And so we said, do you know what? Those are short sentences. We're going to change them right now without saying anything to Brunetta. And we will turn them into ridiculous, unforeseeable sentences so that the facilitator will not understand. So, well, if I say flying tunnel, for example, it's very difficult to foresee. So with Brunella, we made some very meaningless and ridiculous sentences without saying anything to the poor Brunetta, who didn't know. And she had these sentences, meaningless sentences in front of her. So let's look at them. They're also translated into English. If I esteemed him, I would do a ballet. If I jumped the obstacle, I would be a frog. I'm in favor of the mild underwear, astute dissolution of the government. The fields of frogs were plowed. After this, Brunetta asked for a break. Well, this was actually the only time the facilitator and not the boy, well, she asked for a break. Well, I made him write mild underwear. Banally, I'm cool. Apparently upside down, I confront the invasion of the locusts. With courage, I will face the fog. The butts reflected the moon. He kindly sent them to hell, chocolate with sausage. So these are some examples. We made many more, but well, we just decided to make these sentences that Brunetta could never imagine beforehand. We decided to adjust our exercise during that session. And so thank you so much for being ironic and accepting it. The results. Edoardo passed 49 single words and 14 sentences. 67.18% precision. Giovanni T, 53 single words and 8 sentences. Giovanni M passed 94, 86.17% precision. Alessandro, who couldn't be here today, he passed 112, 93.75% precision. Esther passed 98, 65.3% precision. Emanuele passed 55, 69% precision. I think these results are quite good. Well, in my opinion, they are quite good. Can we say that they all did an excellent job? But I'd like to spend a few minutes looking at the mistakes. Well, if you just change a letter, we can't obviously say that the message was not passed. Let's have a look at the mistakes. These are the mistakes all put together. So you can see most common mistakes are little ones, well, these ones that you can see, well, just one letter more, one letter omitted, and so these little omissions, but these mistakes are not serious ones. I mean, they're not those mistakes that prevent the message from being passed. And then we have some phonetic mistakes. Actually, the sound remains similar, even if the word is different, like serenetta, singaretta, marcerai, mangerai, scozzese, scioscese, sarà venuto, venuto. Well, and the other ones, so they are mistakes, but the sound stays quite similar. Then there are three semantic mistakes. Science or scienza becomes incertezza, molto becomes nessuno, buddhista becomes dubitare. So, well, this was Edoardo that made this mistake from science to certainty, and then. There are some other mistakes that, as I said, do still have some phonetic resemblance, and then some other bigger mistakes, like words that are totally different. And we ask them, why did you, come out with this totally different word? We asked Chiara, and she said, chi in the beginning of a word really confuses me. And chi means who, and the speech therapist actually that follows that person, that is helping that person, confirms that she does have this kind of problem. So this is something that I learned from Emerson. You have to analyze mistakes. Mistakes are extremely interesting. They give you an insight view into the mechanisms of a person. And then double letters. Maybe our foreign guests don't know about the Italian language has lots of double letters, really many. And well, from the sound point of view, actually, it sounds the same. So a typical mistake for young children, well, is related to double letters, but also adults in Italy make this mistake quite frequently. So we found, and indeed we found many mistakes with double letters. For example, brace becomes brace, etc. Then we also have some other cases where we have the feeling that the word was not clearly perceived. Probably it was a hearing problem. Or then we have some omissions, some little inversions, some redundancies. For example, D becomes le. Then some connectives, so it means little parts of a sentence like articles or prepositions that are omitted or lost along the way, and then some contractions. So I know probably you're learning some new words today, referring to the Italian grammar. So some little parts of a word disappear, like comunione becomes comune. And then what I did was I asked, yeah? Well, in most of the cases, we showed and we also read the words to them, but sometimes we just indicated the words. Yes, they were always written, always. Giovanni, well, with Giovanni, they were just read to Giovanni. Only read. So every person did it differently. Some of them saw them and heard them. Some other people just heard them. Some others just saw them. So we asked 17 people to assess the words, for example. Well, whenever there was a mistake, we asked 17 people that had nothing to do with facilitated communication. They never heard about it. We asked them which word was meant to be. It was meant to be. So we asked 17 people, look at this list of words that are misspelled or wrong. In your opinion, which word did that person want to write? So when more than 15 people indicated the same word out of 17, I thought that I judged it as a successful message passing. And they were considered as mistakes that they don't affect the message passing. So this includes double letters, simplifications, redundancies, omissions, and some words that are recognized correctly. So as I said, if 17 people out of 17 say this is the word that this person tried to write, well, in my opinion, it was a good message passing. And these are the final percentages. So very good, very high scores. Yes, well, we wondered how come have we reached this result. I may now leave the floor to Fabio for his conclusions, but I think that there was a set of things all together that all worked very well together. Just an example, I'm going to conclude with this example that I really liked. There was a task where Alessandro had to identify some images. So I was showing him a sequence of images, and he had to write down the word. So denomination task. And well, the stimulus was only presented visually. With regard to crocodile, coccodrillo, he wrote dente. Well, this is something that is also used in literature. So he took the most meaningful part of the animal and wrote it down. So for crocodile, he wrote tooth. And then we asked him, what is it? And he said, it's a tooth. So the main thing. But the most meaningful example was when we presented the axle. The axe, and he said, well, masseuse, person doing a massage. And we asked him why that. Well, because he said, massan. And we asked his mother, and she looked for the Italian word. It was in dialect, in the Friuli. Friuli dialect, he said, well, the mom said that it's axe. For axe, they say massan. And so he wrote the first word that came to his mind, and it was in dialect.
Sì. Passiamo.
Giovanni scrive, io sono venuto...
Giovanni writes, I've come to the table mainly to greet everybody. Giulia, first of all. it wasn't difficult for me to to pass the message. For me, well, writing complex things is more difficult, but then articulating simple words or known discourse is easier. My facilitation is low due to a motory problem, not intellectual. Giulia, mild underwear, you shouldn't have told me.
A questo punto, riattacco qui, ci sono i tre punti. Lascerei un minuto.
All right, so now I'm going to leave the floor for the final conclusion to Fabio, who will explain to us why. Well, he will tell us. Well, very quickly, because, you know, it's late and we feel tired and our attention level is going down for sure. So, well, I'm quite sure you caught two main aspects about message passing. So under normal circumstances, when we are communicating with people, this is exactly what happens between two or more people. We just speak, we communicate something that is partially known or unknown. And so we pass a message, and well, nobody questions it. And it is exactly what happened in many of the cases that we saw during the previous speech. So why are we paying so much attention to the precision, the correctness of a message passing? It could be an image, a word, or a sentence. Why are we so sort of maniac about well, paying attention to message passing? Well, because we want to demonstrate that the people that communicate differently, so people that use as a way of communication with the others, not verbal words, spoken words, but rather they use written sentences. Well, these people are forced by the society around us, societies, and the mistrust of society towards disabled people. Well, they have to demonstrate that they are the authors of those sentences and those words. So I'd like to say that this need to demonstrate that they are the authors, well, this is the need of authors when they write a book also, and it happens quite often. Sometimes they copy from each other, actually. And also, people with disabilities have to demonstrate their authorship. So I don't want to talk about writers now, authors, but we're here to talk about people with disabilities. Why do they have to demonstrate their authorship? Well, because they have to be recognized as independent people, autonomous people, who are able to make choices, who are able to express their thoughts, complex and deep thoughts, and they have to demonstrate that they have acquired complex knowledge and that they are able to process this knowledge in order not to encounter obstacles during their education path, their social relationships, etc. And this is our task. This is our goal. And well, today's conference is a very important milestone in our work. So this is why we are paying so much attention to the fact of a message that is communicated to a person that doesn't know it beforehand. Well, as we saw, there are some mistakes, mistakes are sometimes quite banal. Actually, they are not real mistakes because the message is communicated anyway. So if when speaking I make a mistake and I say one word instead of another, but you understand me anyway, well, this happens very often also when we write. And well, it doesn't seem weird, and nobody thinks that this is unusual or weird. So again, we can say that some mistakes are not to be considered as real mistakes. But anyhow, well, as you could see, we reach a very high percentages, sometimes up to 80% of accuracy and precision. So the person that types and communicates by typing passes a sentence, a word, precisely, without the other person receiving it knowing about the meaning of that message beforehand. So we should wonder, how come are we getting such amazing results? And well, you know, we think that we will be able to reach even more exciting results. You see, I'm making a mess now with this sentence, but you didn't realize it. So we will have to change the rules a little bit. The scientific community, the majority of the scientific community, obviously not researchers that carry out research on facilitated communication, but I'm referring to the external scientific community, they really criticized us and criticized the lack of efficiency of message passing. And in most of the cases, they say that communication is inefficient. In our opinion, the criteria by which many of the previous tests were made, they were just based on wrong hypotheses, on wrong assumptions. They didn't really measure the object, they didn't really measure the message passing, but rather they only measured some other variables like work memory, anxiety, and some other factors that we have just seen. They are important during the preparation stage. But why this? Well, because very often facilitated communication was considered as something to be taken as a whole. Either you have it or you don't have it. So, well, we often insist on the idea that facilitated communication is a communication tool. It is an instrument for a person to show what that person has inside. But it is not an instrument that can just be taken and well, put on like a pair of glasses. I put my glasses on and I can see. I take them off and I can't see anymore. So once I put them on,
so I can see correctly. So this is a tool that you take it as it is, as a whole. FC is not like that. FC is a process, is a complex process that entails so many things we're going to discuss this afternoon and tomorrow. So being such a complex process, it's made of steps, and it's not, I mean, a sort of no-return process. Sometimes even the best couple cannot communicate. So, but it is something that is part of life, even of our ordinary life. Sometimes people are not willing to talk. Sometimes people are not able to express the ideas they have in their mind. I mean, there can be so different questions, and so this is not a sort of irreversible process. I mean, and it's not always flawless. It's a process. It's a complex process with so many underlying variables, and it's not irreversible. And even though, of course, the people applying it and the people that learned it and are quite advanced in the acquisition of such a process, of course, are able to do and express through the specific tools, many complex things, so through typing and through the use of the keyboard, a lot of things. So we need sometimes to maybe rediscuss what has been measured so far, so the initial assumptions. So the tool by itself, so message passing, is a constant tool because it doesn't change, I mean, from a setting to another. It's not a matrix that you adapt to. I mean, it's a tool that in technical terms is loyal, is faithful. So it doesn't change, it's stable, but we should ask ourselves, is it valid? It is valid only if it considers the complex experimental assumptions that were mentioned. So only in that case the test can really be seen as a test having a specific value, and that you can really measure the level of transmission of a message, the level of passing of a message. So I'm done. All that means that we wish that all that said and all that considered, and considering these tests, so we can restart a dialogue with those that so far have considered FC as something with no validity, and even more so, something dangerous and to be abandoned. I don't know if you heard the controversies that were sort of touched up by some people, and some people talk about sort of infringement of basic rights of the people because there would be a sort of non-respect of the basic right of an individual. And of course, this is something we reject. I mean, some people talk about the abuse of power, but we reject that totally because, I mean, some people say, how can you be sure that there is no abuse of power, that you're not sort of somehow supporting and assisting the person, but you're guarding the person? Well, actually, this is not the case. We reject these speculations. But this is not the key issue. The key issue is that by restructuring the experimental assumptions, we got meaningful results that are a very high level. So please listen to us, as one of our guests said, please listen to us because we are the ones who are speaking, no other person is speaking for us. And Luca said in the beginning, I do hope that all this will increase the attention of the scientific community and reduce the level of prejudice. But we're going to keep talking about that tomorrow through the study of Professor Mars. So now some break time.